I never thought I'd be one of those people. You know, the ones who end up on the news, their faces pixelated, voices altered, sharing some horrifying tale of how their life went off the rails. But here I am, writing this because I don't know what else to do. I can't go to the police, I can't go to my friends or family. I'm not even sure if I'm safe typing this out, but I need to get it off my chest before it's too late. It all started a few months ago. I was bored, like really bored. Quarantine had been dragging on, and I'd run out of Netflix shows, games, and basically anything else that could hold my attention for more than 5 minutes. I'd heard about the dark web before, seen all those YouTube videos about the crazy stuff people find there. Mostly I figured it was just exaggerated stories to scare the gullible. But I was curious. I mean, how bad could it be? So I did what any idiot with too much time on their hands and too little common sense would do. I downloaded Tor, the browser that lets you access the dark web, and started poking around. At first, it was exactly what I expected. Boring forums, conspiracy theorists, drug dealers, and a lot of garbage. But then I found something different. It was a forum, simple and plain, like something out of the early 2000s. The title was in some language I didn't recognize, but when I translated it, it just said, "The Night Market." There were only a few posts, and they were all in that same weird language. I should have stopped right there. I should have closed my laptop, uninstalled Tor, and forgotten I ever saw it. But instead, I clicked on one of the posts. I don't know why, maybe it was just morbid curiosity, but that click changed everything. The post was a simple link. No description, no comments, just a single link. I hovered over it for a while, my finger trembling over the trackpad. I knew better, but again, I was bored. I clicked it. The link took me to a black screen with a single line of text. "Welcome to the night market. Are you a buyer or a seller?" There were 2 buttons below, one for each option. I clicked buyer, thinking it was just some edgy online shop for stolen goods or something. As soon as I clicked, the screen changed and a list of products appeared. But these weren't stolen electronics or fake IDs. These were people. Pictures of people, with their names, ages, and a description of what they could do. Some of them looked terrified, while others had this dead, hollow look in their eyes. I could barely breathe as I scrolled down, each image worse than the last. There was a chat feature on the side, with people haggling over prices, talking about how useful this or that person would be. I wanted to close the window, but I couldn't. It was like watching a train wreck. You know you shouldn't look, but you can't help yourself. I was about to close the laptop when something caught my eye. It was a picture, a blurry one, but there was something familiar about it. I clicked on it and my blood ran cold. It was my street. The picture was taken from a car, looking at the houses. My house. The description just said, "Young, male, early 20s, home alone, frequently online, easy target." I slammed my laptop shut and backed away from it like it was on fire. My mind was racing. I had no idea what to do. My first instinct was to call the police, but what could I tell them? That I found a picture of my house on a creepy website? That I clicked on some random link on the dark web? They'd probably laugh me out of the station, or worse, they'd think I was involved in something. For the next few days, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I locked all my doors, closed all the curtains, even barricaded myself in my room at night, but nothing happened. Slowly, I convinced myself that it was all a coincidence, that maybe the picture wasn't even of my house, just one that looked similar. I was just being paranoid. Then, one night, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard it again. A faint tapping, like someone was knocking on glass. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was coming from my window. I was too scared to move. My room was dark, but there was just enough light coming in through the curtains for me to make out the silhouette of a person standing outside. They were just standing there, not moving, just watching me. I wanted to scream, but it felt like my throat was paralyzed. The person outside reached up and tapped on the glass again, this time harder. It snapped me out of my terror, and I lunged for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. But when I looked back at the window, the figure was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later, but they didn't find anything. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. They told me it was probably just some kid playing a prank, but I knew better. I knew it had something to do with that website. After that night, things started getting worse. I started noticing people watching me wherever I went. At the grocery store, on the bus, even just walking down the street. They were always different. Sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, but they all had the same look in their eyes, like they were waiting for something. Then the messages started. At first, they were just texts from unknown numbers, telling me they were watching me, that they knew where I lived, where I worked. I tried blocking the numbers, but they just kept coming from different ones. Then I started getting emails with pictures of me going about my day. At work, at the gym, even in my own home. Some of the pictures were taken from inside my house. I stopped going out altogether. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything but sit in my room with the lights off, hoping they'd just leave me alone. But they didn't. One night, I heard a noise downstairs. It was late, probably around 3 a.m., and I was the only one home. I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, a soft thud, like something heavy being dropped. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed and slowly made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my ears. The house was dark, but I could see a faint light coming from the living room. I crept closer, trying not to make any noise. When I peeked around the corner, I saw someone standing in the middle of the room, their back to me. They were tall, wearing a black hoodie pulled up over their head. They hadn't noticed me yet, so I took a deep breath and tightened my grip on the bat. I was about to swing when they turned around. It was me. It was like looking in a mirror, but wrong. The face was mine, but the eyes were dead, empty. It smiled at me, this sick, twisted grin, and then it said something that made my blood run cold. You shouldn't have looked. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up tied to a chair in a dark room, my head throbbing. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I wasn't alone. I could hear someone moving around in the darkness, just out of sight. I tried to scream, but my mouth was gagged. Then the lights came on, and I saw them. There were 3 of them, all wearing those same black hoodies, their faces hidden in the shadows. They didn't say anything, just stared at me. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and calculating. Then, one of them stepped forward and pulled out a knife. I struggled against the ropes, trying to break free, but it was no use. The one with the knife walked up to me and slowly, almost gently, dragged the blade across my arm. The pain was sharp, intense, but I couldn't make a sound. They were testing me, watching my reaction, like they were trying to see how much I could take. They didn't stop at my arm. They kept cutting, slicing into my skin with precision, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. The blood ran down my body, pooling on the floor beneath me. I thought I was going to die right there, in that room. But they didn't kill me. They just kept going, taking their time, making sure I felt every second of it. Eventually, I must have passed out from the pain, because the next thing I remember, I was back in my bed, the sun shining through the curtains. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare, but when I looked down, I saw the bandages wrapped around my arms, my legs, my chest. The cuts were real, deep and angry, like someone had taken a knife to me in my sleep. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. The messages, the pictures, the people watching me, it was all real. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After that night, I stopped being human. That's the best way I can describe it. I wasn't living anymore. I was just surviving, going through the motions. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the knife cutting into my skin, still see those cold, dead eyes staring at me. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me. So I packed a bag and left, not really knowing where I was going, just knowing I had to get away. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My friends wouldn't believe me, and my family. Well, I couldn't drag them into this. They were better off not knowing. I didn't even know if I was being followed. The paranoia was eating me alive, making me second-guess every shadow, every person who got too close. I'd catch glimpses of people in black hoodies out of the corner of my eye, but when I'd turn to look, they'd be gone. I ended up in a cheap motel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. No questions asked, cash only, dirty sheets and flickering lights. Perfect for someone who needed to stay off the radar. The room smelled like mildew and cigarettes, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to lay low for a while, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I'd hear that voice again, whispering in my ear, "You shouldn't have looked." The words echoed in my head, bouncing around my skull until I thought I'd go insane. I couldn't get that twisted smile out of my mind, the way it looked like it belonged on someone else's face, not mine. I spent the next few days glued to my laptop, trying to find any trace of the night market, but it was like it had vanished into thin air. The forum was gone, the links were dead, and there was no mention of it anywhere. It was as if it had never existed. But I knew better. I knew they were out there, watching, waiting. The messages started up again, this time in my email. They weren't like the texts before. These were different, more personal, like whoever was sending them knew exactly what buttons to push. They'd tell me where I'd been that day, who I'd spoken to, what I'd eaten. They even started sending me videos. Videos of me in my motel room, sleeping, showering, just sitting on the bed staring at the walls. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. They were inside my room. I searched the entire place for cameras, tearing the room apart, but I couldn't find anything. No hidden lenses, no microphones. It didn't make sense, but none of this did. They were always one step ahead of me, always knew where I'd be before I got there. It was like they could read my mind, anticipate my every move. Then one day, I got an email with an attachment. I almost didn't open it, but something about it was different from the others. The subject line just said, "See you soon," with that same twisted smiley face. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The file was a video, shaky and low quality, like it was shot on a phone. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was my old house. The camera moved through the rooms, showing every detail, the pictures on the walls, the furniture, everything exactly as I'd left it. Then it stopped in front of my bedroom door. My heart was in my throat as the door creaked open, revealing the bed. There was someone lying on it, covered in blood-soaked bandages. It took me a moment to recognize the person. It was me. My face was pale, lifeless, eyes wide open, but staring at nothing. The camera zoomed in on my face, holding there for a long moment before the screen went black. I dropped the laptop and backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. It wasn't possible. I was alive, standing in this shitty motel room, but that video, it was like they were showing me what was going to happen, like they were giving me a glimpse of my own death. I knew I couldn't stay in the motel any longer. They knew where I was. Hell, they'd probably known the entire time. I had to keep moving, stay ahead of them, but I didn't even know where to go. I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't go to the police, couldn't go home. I was trapped in my own life, running from shadows. But I wasn't fast enough. One night, I was packing my bag to leave again when I heard a noise outside the door. It was subtle, just the slightest scrape against the wood, like someone was testing the lock. My heart stopped. I grabbed the bat I'd kept by the bed, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold on to it. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. But the noise stopped, and everything went quiet. I must have stood there for at least an hour, waiting, listening. But nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my imagination, that the stress was getting to me. I turned to grab my bag when the door burst open, the wood splintering as it slammed against the wall. I barely had time to react before they were on me. There were 3 of them, dressed in those same black hoodies, their faces hidden behind masks. I swung the bat wildly, catching one of them on the arm, but it barely slowed them down. They tackled me to the ground, the bat clattering out of my hands as they pinned me down. I fought back as hard as I could, kicking, punching, anything to get them off me, but they were too strong. One of them pulled out a syringe, the needle glinting in the dim light. I screamed, thrashing even harder as they held me down, but it was no use. I felt the needle pierce my skin, the cold liquid flooding into my veins. My vision started to blur, my limbs going numb as the drug took hold. The last thing I remember was that twisted smile, the one from my nightmare, hovering over me as everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a different room, bare walls, no windows, just a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. My wrists and ankles were tied to a chair, the ropes cutting into my skin. My mouth was gagged again, my head pounding from whatever they'd injected me with. They were there, standing in the shadows, watching me. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and detached. One of them stepped forward, holding a small handheld camera. They pointed it at me, the the red light blinking as they started recording. The first cut was quick, almost surgical. They were efficient, methodical, taking their time as they carved into my skin. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but endure it. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever felt, sharp and relentless. But there was something else, something even worse. It was the way they looked at me, like I was just an object, a piece of meat. They didn't say a word the entire time, just kept cutting, slicing into me with that same cold precision. The blood ran down my arms, pooling on the floor, but they didn't stop. They wouldn't stop. Not until they were done with me. They were making a video, just like the ones they'd sent me. I realized then that this was their plan all along. They were documenting everything, every cut, every drop of blood, every moment of agony. This was what they did. They found people like me, people who were curious, people who looked where they shouldn't have, and they turned them into something else, something that could be sold on the dark web. My mind was slipping, the pain blurring into a dull haze as the blood loss took its toll. I could feel myself fading, slipping away, but I didn't care. I just wanted it to end. I wanted the pain to stop, the fear to go away. But they wouldn't let me die. Not yet. They had to finish their masterpiece first. Eventually, they stopped cutting. I was barely conscious, my vision swimming, but I could still hear them talking, their voices low and muffled. They were discussing something, arguing over what to do next. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were deciding my fate. Then, one of them stepped forward and crouched down in front of me. They reached up and pulled off their mask, and for the first time, I saw their face. It was my face. The same twisted smile, the same dead eyes. It was like looking into a mirror, but it wasn't me. It couldn't be me. I was losing my mind, the world spinning out of control as I stared into my own eyes. The doppelganger leaned in close, their breath hot on my face, and whispered one last thing before everything went black. "Welcome to the night market." When I woke up, I was back in the motel room. The sun was shining through the curtains, the birds chirping outside like nothing had happened. But the bandages were real, the blood was real, and the nightmare was real. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the motel room. At first, I thought it was just another nightmare, that I was still trapped in that hellish cycle of fear and pain. But the moment I tried to move, I knew it was all real. My entire body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as I struggled to sit up. The bandages were still there, wrapped tight around my arms and legs, sticky with blood that had started to seep through. I had no idea how long I'd been unconscious, but it couldn't have been more than a few hours. The clock on the nightstand showed it was just past noon, the sunlight filtering through the grimy curtains casting an eerie glow across the room. Everything looked the same as before, but I felt different, like something inside me had changed, like they'd taken something from me that I could never get back. My first instinct was to get out, to run as far as I could, but I could barely stand, let alone walk. Every step sent waves of agony shooting through my body, and I had to bite down hard on my lip to keep from screaming. I made it to the bathroom, gripping the sink for support as I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. My skin was pale, almost ghostly, the dark circles under my eyes making me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. The bandages wrapped around my arms and chest were crude, stained with blood. But what really got to me were the cuts. Deep, jagged lines that crisscrossed my flesh like some kind of sick road map. They'd carved into me, left their mark, and I knew it wasn't just physical. I couldn't stay there. They knew where I was, had already proven they could get to me whenever they wanted. I had to leave, find somewhere else to hide. But where? I was out of options, out of ideas, and the panic was starting to set in. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto my phone as I fumbled to call a cab. The ride was a blur. The driver didn't ask questions. He just glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes lingering on the blood seeping through my bandages, before turning his attention back to the road. I told him to take me to the nearest hospital, figuring it was the only place I could go where I might be safe, at least for a little while. When I got there, the nurses took one look at me and rushed me into a room. They asked a lot of questions. What had happened? Who had done this to me? But I couldn't give them any real answers. I just kept saying I didn't remember, that I'd been attacked and left for dead. It It wasn't far from the truth, but I knew better than to tell them the whole story. They wouldn't believe me anyway. They patched me up, stitched the worst of the cuts, and wrapped me in fresh bandages. The doctor wanted to keep me overnight for observation, but I refused. I couldn't stay in one place for too long. I told them I'd be fine, that I just needed to get some rest. And after a lot of back and forth, they finally let me go with a prescription for painkillers and strict orders to take it easy. I found another motel, this one even more run down than the last. The kind of place where people go to disappear, where nobody asks questions and nobody cares if you don't come out for days. I locked myself in the room and pushed the dresser in front of the door, wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. For the next few days, I stayed holed up in that room, barely eating, barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, my face, grinning at me from the darkness, whispering those words over and over, "Welcome to the night market." It was like they'd planted something in my mind, some kind of virus that was slowly driving me insane. The messages didn't stop. They kept coming, day and night, relentless. Emails, texts, even voicemails, each one more disturbing than the last. They sent pictures of me in the hospital, lying on the gurney, the nurses working frantically to stop the bleeding. They sent videos of me tossing and turning in bed, my face contorted in pain. They even sent a live feed once, showing the outside of my motel room door, the red recording light blinking ominously in the corner. They were taunting me, letting me know that no matter where I went, they could find me. There was no escape, no way out. I was trapped in their game, and they were playing with me like a cat with a mouse, dragging out the inevitable. Then, one night, something changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it. A faint tapping, just like before. It was coming from the window this time, the sound barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. My heart leaped into my throat as I slowly turned my head to look. There was someone standing outside, their silhouette barely visible through the thin curtains. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see their face. They were just standing there, waiting for me to do something. My whole body was tense, every nerve on edge, as I forced myself to sit up. I knew I had to do something, but my mind was racing, trying to figure out if this was another one of their games, or if it was something worse. The tapping continued, steady and insistent, like they were trying to lure me closer. I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the bed, my fingers trembling as I gripped it tightly. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Slowly I got to my feet and started to inch toward the window, every step feeling like it took an eternity. When I was close enough, I reached out with my free hand and pulled the curtain back just a little, just enough to get a glimpse of who or what was on the other side. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was me again, staring back at me through the glass, the same face, the same eyes, the same twisted smile. But this time, there was something different. The reflection was distorted, the features warped and exaggerated, like I was looking into a funhouse mirror. The eyes were too large, too bright, the smile too wide, stretching impossibly across its face. It raised its hand and tapped on the glass again, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. I stumbled back, my legs giving out as I collapsed onto the floor. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out, but my body wouldn't listen. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to tear my eyes away from that horrifying reflection. Then, it spoke. The voice was mine, but it was wrong, warped and twisted, like it was being played through a broken speaker. "Let me in," it whispered, the words slithering into my ears like venom. "Let me in, and I'll make it all stop." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I knew it wasn't real, knew it was just another one of their tricks, but it felt so real. The reflection tilted its head, the smile growing even wider, impossibly wide, splitting its face in two. "You can't hide forever," it hissed, the voice growing louder, more insistent. "You're ours now. You'll always be ours." I wanted to scream, to shout, to do anything to make it stop, but the words caught in my throat. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the room shrinking around me as the reflection pressed its face against the glass, its eyes boring into mine. "Let me in," it said again, its voice a low growl now, vibrating through the air like a swarm of angry bees. "Let me in, and it'll all be over." I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the door, yanking the dresser out of the way with a strength I didn't know I had. I ripped the chair from under the handle and threw the door open, stumbling out into the night. I didn't care where I was going, didn't care who saw me. I just needed to get away. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, and I collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for air. The streets were empty, silent. The only sound, my own ragged breathing. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but nothing looked familiar. I had no idea where I was. I pulled out my phone, my hands still shaking, and checked the GPS. The screen flickered, the map glitching out, but I managed to get a rough idea of where I was. I was miles away from the motel, in a part of town I didn't recognize. I had to keep moving, had to find somewhere safe. But as I started to get up, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice. Slowly I turned around, dreading what I might see. It was a man, middle-aged, dressed in a dirty coat, his face lined with wrinkles and exhaustion. He looked like he'd been living on the streets for years. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with eyes that were too familiar, too knowing. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "They're coming for you." I swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic at bay. "Who?" I managed to croak out, though I already knew the answer. He didn't respond, just shook his head and pointed down the street. "Run," he said, his voice almost pleading. "Run, and don't look back." I didn't need to be told twice. I took off, my legs barely able to carry me, but I ran anyway, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Who was that man? How did he know about them? Was he another victim, or was he part of this sick game? But I didn't have time to think. All I knew was that I had to keep running, had to stay ahead of whatever was coming for me. As I ran, I heard it again, the tapping. It was faint at first, but it grew louder with each passing second, echoing in my ears, filling my mind with that same twisted voice. "Let me in!" I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could do was keep running, hoping against hope that I could outrun the nightmare that had taken over my life. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no escape. They were always going to find me. They were always going to win. I don't know how long I ran, but by the time I stopped, I could barely breathe. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and every inch of my body screamed in agony. But the worst pain was in my mind, that gnawing, relentless fear that wouldn't let go. It was like a black hole had opened up inside me, sucking in every bit of hope, every shred of sanity I had left. I stumbled into an alleyway, the narrow space between two crumbling buildings offering just enough darkness to hide in. My back hit the wall, and I slid down to the cold, damp ground, pulling my knees to my chest as I tried to catch my breath. I was drenched in sweat, shaking so hard I thought I might fall apart right there. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, my heart racing as I tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the alley like the ticking of a clock, counting down the seconds until my end. I tensed, every muscle in my body going rigid as I listened, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was getting closer, but it was impossible to tell from which direction. I pressed myself tighter against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible, willing the darkness to swallow me whole. But the footsteps kept coming, closer and closer, until they stopped just a few feet away. I held my breath, the air thick with the scent of garbage and decay. My mind was racing, searching for a way out, but I was trapped, cornered like a rat in a cage. I couldn't see who it was, couldn't even make out a shadow, but I could feel them. That same cold, unfeeling presence I'd felt before. "Found you." The voice was a whisper, low and guttural, but it cut through the darkness like a knife. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. They'd found me again. No matter how far I ran, no matter where I hid, they were always one step ahead. I scrambled to my feet, my body screaming in protest as I prepared to run again, but it was too late. A hand shot out of the darkness, grabbing my arm with a grip like iron. I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls of the alley, but no one was there to hear it. The hand yanked me forward, dragging me out of the shadows and into the faint light of a distant street lamp. There were 3 of them, just like before, dressed in black hoodies, their faces obscured by shadows. but I knew who they were. I'd seen them before, felt their cold, dead eyes watching me, their twisted smiles haunting my nightmares. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling as I struggled to break free. "Just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear, I swear." The one holding me tightened their grip, pulling me closer until I could feel their breath on my face. "It's too late for that," they hissed, their voice dripping with malice. "You're part of this now. There's no way out." I felt a surge of panic, the fear choking me, making it impossible to think. I thrashed against them, kicking and clawing, but they were too strong. They dragged me deeper into the alley, away from the light, into the pitch-black darkness that seemed to swallow everything. I was tossed to the ground, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I tried to get up, but a boot came down on my chest, pinning me in place. The pain was immediate and excruciating, like my ribs were being crushed under a ton of weight. I gasped for air, tears streaming down my face as I looked up at my captors. "Why are you doing this?" I choked out, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The one standing over me leaned down, their face still hidden in the shadows. "We don't want anything from you," they said, their tone almost casual. "We just want to make sure you understand what happens to people who look where they shouldn't." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, they pulled out a phone and started recording. The red light blinked on, that tiny, insignificant dot that I'd come to fear more than anything in the world. "Say hello to the night market," they said, their voice cold and devoid of any emotion. I shook my head, tears blurring my vision as I tried to comprehend what was happening. They were filming me, documenting my fear, my pain, just like they'd done before. This was all part of their twisted game, and I was the main attraction. One of them pulled out a knife, the blade gleaming in the dim light. I recognized it immediately, the same knife they'd used before, the one that had left my body covered in scars. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed with fear, my mind shutting down as I stared at the blade. They moved slowly, deliberately, dragging the knife across my skin with a surgeon's precision. The pain was sharp, intense, but it was the coldness in their eyes that scared me the most. They weren't doing this out of anger or revenge. They were doing it because they enjoyed it. Because to them, I was nothing more than a plaything, something to be used and discarded. I don't know how long it went on. Minutes, hours, it all blurred together in a haze of pain and fear. The knife cut deep, over and over, but they were careful not to do too much damage, not to let me pass out or bleed out too quickly. They wanted me to feel everything, to be aware of every single moment of suffering. Eventually the knife stopped. My body was a patchwork of cuts and bruises, my clothes soaked in blood. I was barely conscious, my vision swimming as I fought to stay awake. I could hear them talking, their voices low and muffled, but I couldn't make out the words. Then, they stopped talking, and I felt a pair of hands grab my shoulders, lifting me up. My body screamed in protest, every nerve on fire, but I couldn't resist. I was too weak, too broken to fight back. They dragged me through the alley, my feet scraping against the ground, my head lolling to the side as I struggled to keep my eyes open. The world was a blur, the buildings and streets merging into one dark, twisted nightmare. I was thrown into the back of a van, the door slamming shut behind me. The darkness was absolute, the air thick with the scent of oil and sweat. I tried to move, to crawl away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was too far gone, my mind slipping into unconsciousness as the van started to move. I don't know how long we drove. Time had lost all meaning, the world outside the van, nothing more than a distant memory. All I knew was the pain, the cold, and the fear that had burrowed so deep inside me that I didn't think I'd ever be free of it. At some point, the van stopped. The doors opened, and I was dragged out, the light blinding after so long in the dark. I squinted, trying to make out where I was, but everything was a blur. All I could see were shadows, moving around me, voices echoing in the distance. They took me into a building, the air inside cool and sterile, like a hospital. I was dumped onto a cold metal table, my body too weak to even try to get up. The room was stark, empty, except for the table and the harsh overhead lights that made everything look washed out and unreal. I could hear them moving around, their footsteps echoing off the walls. They were preparing something, but I didn't know what. My mind was too foggy, too overwhelmed to make sense of what was happening. Then, I heard it. A faint hum, like machinery coming to life. The sound was steady, almost soothing, but there was something off about it. It was too precise, too calculated, like it was designed to get inside your head. I tried to focus, tried to understand what was happening, but my thoughts were slipping away, drowning in that relentless hum. I felt something cold press against my temple, and for a moment, everything became clear. They weren't just going to kill me. They were going to erase me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, but there was nothing I could do. My body was useless, my mind unraveling under the weight of that terrible, all-consuming hum. I wanted to scream, to beg, to do anything to stop what was coming, but it was too late. The machine whirred to life, and I felt a sharp pain in my head, like someone had driven a spike through my skull. The pain spread, engulfing me, tearing through my thoughts, my memories, everything that made me who I was. It was like they were ripping me apart from the inside out, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I was left lying on that cold metal table, staring up at the ceiling, my mind a blank slate. I didn't know who I was, where I was, or how I'd gotten there. The memories were gone, wiped clean, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The relentless hum that had drilled into my skull was gone, leaving behind an empty, deafening quiet. My head throbbed with a dull ache, the kind that burrows deep into your bones and refuses to let go. I opened my eyes, but the world around me was a blur, shapes and shadows melting into one another like a half-forgotten dream. I tried to move, but my body felt foreign, like it didn't belong to me. My limbs were stiff, unresponsive, as if I hadn't used them in days. I forced myself to sit up, my muscles protesting with every inch. The room was dimly lit, the harsh fluorescent lights above casting everything in a sickly yellow hue. The walls were bare, the floor cold and sterile, but there was something deeply wrong about the place. Something that set every nerve on edge. I looked down at myself, expecting to see the bandages, the blood, the scars that had marked my descent into this nightmare. But my skin was clean, smooth. No cuts, no bruises. It was like my body had been wiped clean, just like my mind. The sight should have brought me some kind of relief, but it only filled me with a deep, gnawing dread. I slid off the table, my legs shaky as they struggled to hold my weight. Every step was tentative, each movement deliberate, as I tried to get a sense of where I was. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, sharp and clinical. But underneath it was something else, something metallic, like the tang of blood. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and beyond it I could see a long, narrow hallway, bathed in the same sickly yellow light. The walls were lined with doors, each identical, each leading to God knows what horrors. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tried to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to stay, to hide in that room and pretend none of this was happening, but I knew that wasn't an option, not anymore. I stepped into the hallway, the cold floor biting into the soles of my bare feet. The silence was oppressive, the kind that presses down on you, makes it hard to breathe. I moved cautiously, my ears straining for any sound, any hint of what lay ahead. But there was nothing, just the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the lights overhead. I passed by the first door, then the second, each one identical, each one closed. My hand itched to reach out, to open one, to see what was behind it. But something held me back. Some deep primal instinct told me that whatever was behind those doors was not meant to be seen. As I moved further down the hallway, I started to notice things. Small, subtle details that made my skin crawl. The walls were too clean, too smooth, like they'd been scrubbed over and over, erasing any trace of what might have happened there. The air was too still, too stale, as if it hadn't been breathed in for a long, long time. And then there was the smell, that faint metallic tang that grew stronger the further I went. I came to a stop in front of one door, different from the others. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out into the hallway. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. The door creaked open with a groan, the sound echoing down the hallway like a dying breath. The room inside was dark. the only light coming from a small, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. The shadows danced across the walls, twisting and contorting like they had a life of their own. But it wasn't the darkness that made my blood run cold. It was what I saw in the center of the room. There was a chair, old and rusted, the kind you'd see in a doctor's office from decades ago. Strapped to the chair was a figure, slumped forward, their head hanging limply on their chest. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the metallic tang of blood so strong it burned my nostrils. I could hear the faint drip, drip, drip of liquid hitting the floor, each drop echoing in the silence. I didn't want to get closer. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to run, to get as far away from that room as possible. But I was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame, unable to resist the pull of whatever horror lay in that chair. As I approached, I could make out more details. The figure's clothes were tattered, blood-stained, the fabric clinging to their thin, emaciated frame. Their hands were strapped to the armrests, their feet bound to the legs of the chair with thick leather straps. I could see the cuts, deep and angry, crisscrossing their skin like the ones that had once marked my own body. But it wasn't until I saw their face that the true horror hit me. It was my face, or at least it had been. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over the skull. The eyes were sunken, the sockets dark and empty, the flesh around them tinged with a sickly yellow. The lips were cracked and dried, pulled back in a grotesque grin that exposed the teeth, stained red with blood. But it was the eyes, those empty, lifeless eyes, that made me want to scream, because they were my eyes, staring back at me from the depths of that decaying husk. I staggered back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the scream that threatened to tear out of my throat. My vision blurred, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. I was alive, standing there in that room, but so was that thing. How could this be happening? My head was spinning, the room tilting as I fought to stay on my feet. I backed away, my eyes never leaving that decaying figure. As I stumbled toward the door, something caught my eye, a small handheld camera, sitting on a table just out of the light's reach. The red recording light was blinking. They'd filmed everything. Every second of my torment, my fear, my pain, they'd turned it into their sick little project, their masterpiece of suffering. And now, they were showing me the final product. I turned and bolted out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the doors blurring together as I ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just needed to get away, to escape this nightmare that had taken over my life. But there was no escape. The hallway ended in a dead end, a blank, featureless wall that loomed in front of me, blocking any way out. I spun around, my back pressed against the cold surface, my eyes wide with terror as I realized what I'd walked into. It was a trap, a sick, twisted game that I'd never had a chance of winning. And then I heard it again, the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the hallway as they approached. I pressed myself against the wall, my entire body trembling with fear. They were coming for me. They'd found me again. And this time, there was nowhere to run. The first figure stepped into view, dressed in that same black hoodie, their face hidden in the shadows. Then another, and another, until the hallway was filled with them. They stood there, silent, watching me with those cold, dead eyes that had haunted my nightmares. I tried to scream, to plead, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my voice lost in the overwhelming terror that gripped me. They started to move forward, slow and deliberate, their footsteps echoing like the ticking of a clock, counting down the seconds until the end. Then, the one in front reached up and pulled down their hood. My breath caught in my throat as I saw their face. It was me, again and again and again. Every single one of them had my face, twisted, decaying, smiling that same sick, twisted grin. The eyes were hollow, empty, but they were mine, staring back at me with a malevolent gleam. They closed in on me, their movements slow and purposeful, like predators circling their prey. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to fight. My mind was breaking, shattering under the weight of what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. The leader stepped forward, their face inches from mine. I could smell the rot, the decay, the sickly sweet scent of death that clung to them like a second skin. Their hand reached out, cold fingers brushing against my cheek, sending a jolt of icy terror through my body. "Welcome to the night market," they whispered, their voice low and distorted, like a record played at the wrong speed. The others echoed the words, their voices blending together into a nightmarish chorus that filled the hallway, filled my mind, until it was all I could hear, all I could think about. Welcome to the night market. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. The world was closing in around me, the walls pressing in, the darkness swallowing me whole. Welcome to the night market. They were all around me now, their faces so close, so twisted. Their cold, decaying breath washed over me as they chanted those words, again and again, drilling them into my mind until I thought I would lose what little sanity I had left. Welcome to the night market. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare that felt like it would never end. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a painful reminder that I was still alive, still conscious, still aware of every horrifying second. The leader leaned in closer, their eyes boring into mine, that twisted grin spreading across their face. I could see the rot, the decay eating away at their flesh, but the eyes, those eyes, were mine. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. This was what I would become. This was what they had planned for me all along. "Let me in," they whispered, their voice dripping with malice, echoing the words I'd heard before, the words that had haunted my every waking moment since this nightmare began. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face as I mouthed the word, no, but it was futile. They had me. They had all of me, my body, my mind, my soul. There was no escape, no way out. This was the end. "Let me in," they repeated, their voice growing louder, more insistent. The others closed in around me, their voices joining the chant, filling the hallway with that relentless, mind-numbing mantra. "Let me in." I could feel them pressing against me, their cold, dead hands gripping my arms, my legs, my throat. They were everywhere, suffocating me, pulling me down into the darkness, into the void where they had come from. My vision blurred, the world tilting as I struggled to stay conscious, to fight back against the overwhelming tide of fear that threatened to drown me. But it was no use. I was losing myself, piece by piece, as their hands tore into my flesh, as their voices invaded my mind. I could feel something inside me breaking, shattering, as they dragged me deeper into the abyss. My thoughts were slipping away, my memories fading into nothingness, replaced by that endless echoing chant. "Let me in." And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, just when I was about to give in, to let go of whatever was left of me, the chanting stopped. The silence was deafening, almost worse than the noise. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The hands that had been gripping me so tightly were gone. The pressure on my chest lifted. I blinked, my vision slowly coming back into focus, but what I saw made my heart stop. The hallway was empty. I was alone. The figures, the twisted versions of myself, had vanished, leaving nothing behind but the faint scent of decay that clung to the air. I stumbled back, my legs barely able to hold me up, as I tried to process what had just happened. Had it all been a hallucination? A sick, twisted trick of the mind? I didn't know, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I needed to get out, to escape this place before whatever nightmare had haunted me came back to finish the job. I turned and ran, my feet slapping against the cold, hard floor as I bolted down the hallway. The doors on either side blurred past me, the walls closing in as I sprinted toward the end, where a faint light beckoned me forward. I reached the end of the hallway and burst through a set of double doors, stumbling into a large, open space. The room was vast, dimly lit by a single flickering light overhead. The walls were lined with rows of shelves, each one filled with monitors, computers, and other equipment I didn't recognize. It looked like some kind of control room, but for what, I couldn't tell. In the center of the room was a large screen, the only one that was on. The image on the screen made my blood run cold. It was me, I was standing in the hallway, exactly where I had been just moments ago, surrounded by those twisted, decaying figures. But something was different. The me on the screen wasn't terrified, wasn't panicking. Instead, I was smiling, that same sick, twisted grin that I had seen on their faces. I took a step back, my mind reeling as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could react, the image on the screen changed. It was a live feed of a dark room, lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center of the room was a chair, and strapped to the chair was a figure that looked exactly like me. The figure's head hung limply on its chest, the body slumped forward as if it had been drained of all life. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and the cuts, those deep, angry cuts that I remembered so vividly, crisscrossed its arms, its legs, its chest. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my ears as the realization hit me like a freight train. The figure in the chair wasn't just a reflection, wasn't just a twisted version of myself. It was me, the real me. The me that had been taken, tortured, and broken by the night market. The me that had been erased, replaced by whatever hollow shell was now standing in this room. I backed away from the screen, my hands trembling as I tried to process the horror of what I was seeing. But no matter how hard I tried to deny it, to push the thought away, I couldn't escape the truth. They had taken me. They had erased me. And now, they had made me one of them. As I stood there staring at the screen, the live feed flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw something else. A reflection of my own face, twisted into that same grotesque grin that had haunted me since this nightmare began. But it wasn't just my face. It was the faces of all those who had come before me, all those who had been taken, tortured, and erased by the night market. And then, I heard it again. The voice. Low, distorted, echoing through the room like a death knell. "Welcome to the night market." I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps as I searched for the source of the voice. But there was no one there. The room was empty, silent, save for the faint hum of the equipment around me. And then I realized the truth. The voice wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from me. I stumbled back, my mind reeling as the full horror of what had happened finally hit me. I was no longer myself. I was no longer human. I was just another product, another twisted creation of the night market. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see the cuts, the blood, the scars that had marked my descent into this nightmare. But there was nothing there. My skin was smooth, unmarked, perfect. Perfect for the night market. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was part of the machine, part of the twisted, sadistic game that had claimed so many before me. I had become one of them. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the lights in the room flickered and went out, plunging me into complete darkness. For a moment, I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tried to make sense of what was happening. But then, I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the darkness. They were coming for me, but this time, I wasn't afraid, because now, I understood. This was what I had become. This was my life now, and there was no escape. As the footsteps grew closer, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The fear, the panic, the desperation that had consumed me for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, empty acceptance. I was one of them now, and there was nothing I could do to change that. The footsteps stopped, and I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and clammy, the touch sending a shiver down my spine. I didn't flinch, didn't pull away. I just stood there, waiting, knowing what was coming. And then, in the darkness, I heard the voice one last time. "Welcome to the night market." And with that, everything went black.